Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. In each one of these episodes, we go over another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D, and today's 3D modeling tool is called Sweep. So let's jump into Cinema 4D and show how this works. We're going to be making these candlesticks here. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. If I hit Control D, you can see that our project scale has inches. And I also have that same units in my preferences. So that's in the Edit Preferences. You can also open that up with Control E. You can see the hotkey there. Our display is inches. So that's what I'm working in today. You can work in whatever you'd like to. While we're creating these candlesticks, I'm going to close this right now. And the next thing I'd like to do is actually use the guide tool in order to create a reference for myself so that I make sure that while I'm 3D modeling this, it is a realistic size. We don't want to accidentally create a candlestick that is the size of a skyscraper or the size of a building or a person. We want it to be a realistic size for a candlestick. So we're going to use our guide tool. And now I have an entire episode on the guide tool, so if you're interested in learning more about that, you can check it out there. I'll leave any tools that I do not dive into great depth within this tutorial in the description so that you can see the videos that focus on those. So let's get started. I'm going to hit the middle mouse button so that we can see all 4 views here. Now I can click the middle mouse button again in the front view. And now we have the front view nice and big for us to work in. I have enabled snap on. You can also enable this using Shift S. You can tell that it's enabled because it is purple. In our modeling settings, I have grid work plane checked so that we snap to that. I'll click away and you can see that we are snapping to this grid point here. So I'll begin drawing our guide. I'll snap here and I'll snap off to the side here. And now it says my size in the X is 2.8. We want this to be 2. We want this to be about 6 here for the size Z. And that's about the size a candlestick should be. So we can use this as a 3D modeling reference. Now that we have our guide in here, what I want to do is begin drawing a spline for our candlestick. So I'll go into our spline pen tool over here and we can just start drawing a spline, and you can even use your snap settings in order to have this snap to our guide if we'd like to. So I'll just go ahead and maybe we'll make this a little bit of a curvy spline here. You can get creative with what shape this candlestick is. It's really all up to you. And now we have the spline here. If we'd like to sweep something across it, we could even sweep a rectangle here. So I'll drop in the rectangle. 400 inches is way too big, so I'll make this 2 by 2 just for right now. We can even add some rounding to this if we'd like. We could make this 0.2 so that we have a nice bevel along there. And once we have that done, we can go ahead and add in our sweep. So over here you can see we have our sweep if I hold a click here. And now the order in which we do this is really important. So we need to add in our rectangle as well as our spline. And we actually need the rectangle to be on the top in the hierarchy. Now the reason for that is the rectangle is what is being swept along this path. Our spline is the path, so what you're sweeping needs to be above the path so that Cinema 4D knows what's what. And now let's go into some of our sweep settings because we don't quite have this where we'd like it to be. The basic settings are the same for all the different tools. You can turn on and off whether if this is visible in your viewport or renderer. You can enable or disable the sweep. You can choose the display color. I have it on material. You can choose layer, automatic, or custom if you'd like to change the color. If you turn on X-ray, you can make it so they can see through it, which might help you with 3D modeling. Under coordinates, we have transform, and that's your position, rotation, and scale that you can adjust here. Under object, we have some more options here. So let's get started with, first of all, this 2-rail system. So you can see we have one spline here, and this is a very funny looking shape. So what would make a lot more sense is if I hold down Control and I duplicate this spline and I use a secondary spline in order to control the shape. So what I need to do is go into Object or Model mode, and then I can actually move the shape off to the side. And now at this point, you should be able to see that this is, if I go and tear with the middle mouse button, you can see that this is in fact controlling the shape of this object with the secondary spline. Now I actually want this shape to be going the other way, so I'll click R in order to rotate this. And I'll hold down Shift and so that I can use quantize to snap this at 180 degrees. I'll leave a link to the quantize tool here, and then I can move this out. And you can notice that this is adjusting the scale when I move this back and forth. And if I move it this way, we're adjusting the rotation of the sweep. Now, the reason why I'm showing you that is because if we click on our sweep here, you have options here. So one of the options is use rail direction. So if we turn this off, it will no longer be using that rail to control it, to control the rotation. If we turn off use rail scale, the rail will no longer be used to adjust the scale here. If 2-rail is enabled, the spline path will be placed in between the 2 rail paths as they are here. If you turn this off, you can see that that is no longer what is happening. If you choose keep segments, now let's go ahead and turn on our line so that you can see our segments here. So what keep segments does is actually, this comes into play when you're using the end rotation. I mean, when you're using the start growth or end growth. So if I adjust this end growth here, you'll see what happens. You can adjust where this is, the percentage of it here. You can also do this with the start growth. So this is what this does, and you can actually keyframe this. So if you see these diamonds over here, those are telling you that this is a setting that you can keyframe. You'll notice that I grabbed this tool not from the mesh menu, but from this menu here, and all of these are generators. The great thing about generators is that they have adjustable settings. They are parametric. It's a parametric way of 3D modeling. And the great thing about parametric modeling is that you also have these settings here that you can keyframe. So it's useful for if you need to animate something. There are restrictions with parametric modeling, but that's one of the pros of it, is that you can animate with it and you can keyframe these settings by clicking here. If I click here, the keyframe turns red. I can move this forward in the timeline. I can keyframe it again over here. If I go back to the beginning and hit play, you can see that's animating. So that's just good to be aware of, that these settings you can keyframe. I'm going to delete those keyframes there because that's not what I'd like to do for this. Now for the end growth, I need to show how keep segments works for our sweep here. If I check this on and adjust our end growth, you'll see it is snapping to each one of the segments. That's what keep segments does. If we turn this off, it just adjusts very smoothly like this. I'll turn that off for now. You can also adjust the end rotation. So if I adjust the rotation, you can see that this is twisting. So you can change the shape of this and add some twist. You can also adjust the end scale. You can see that that's adjusting the scale there. And it decides which way is the end by the order in which you draw your spline. So the top is the end because that's the last point of the spline, the order in which I drew it. So isoparm subdivision, let's go through that. Right now in our display, we have wireframe on, and the hotkey for that is NH. If we turn on isoparms instead, how this looks is going to be a little bit different. Isoparms aren't showing the exact polygons of your model and the edges, but what it does is it shows you the curvature of a model. So it's just another way of viewing your model. I'm going to turn back on wireframe because that's what we're working in mainly now. But you'll notice that if I turn on wireframe, adjusting this isoparms isn't adjusting how you see it. So I just want you to be aware of what that setting does. We have this option here called parallel movement. What that'll do is it'll create the sweep with the parallel, with both of these parallel. So the rectangle would be parallel. We'd actually need to adjust this, or we'd need to adjust this to the XZ direction in order to have the sweep show up correct. If we change this to the XY direction, what we start off with, you can see that this is flat and it has intersecting geometry. This is not good. So this is just determining how this sweep is being made. I'm going to turn off parallel movement. We have constant cross-section as another option. So this is actually easier to show on a star. So I'm holding a click on our spline primitives. I'll drop in a star here. I'll make the inner radius 2 and our outer radius 3. I'll move this on over here. We're going to add in a very small circle. I'll make this 0.2 and we'll add in a sweep. We'll sweep this circle along the star. We'll use the star as a path. Here you'll see we have constant cross-section on, and you can see that the cross-section here is consistent. If I were to turn this off, Now you can see it's no longer consistent. So I'll click this on and off again just so you can see what that's doing. This keeps it consistent as it sweeps around. When this comes up to corners, and you'll even see this more if I increase the outer radius, it gets very thin. Here I just like to quickly go over banking and what that means. You can see it is right here, and the star is a great example to show banking on. So what banking basically does is that if it's enabled, the contour spline, which is this one here, the circle that's being swept, will lean into the shape of the curve that it's going around. So it's less likely to get twisted. It'll help Cinema 4D use the shape of the spline to determine at what angle that contour spline should be at. And this is determined by the path spline. So if I click up here, you can see we have banking on, and this is why our spline looks so nice and is following the curvature of the star really well. And if I turn this off, you'll see we have some twisting here that is taking place. I think that's good to usually leave banking on to avoid that. This usually gives you a more accurate result. So reverse normals, that'll reverse the normals on the sweep. Usually Cinema 4D is pretty good at calculating which direction your normal should go when you're creating a sweep. The normal direction is telling Cinema 4D which side of the polygon is the outside of the object and which side of the polygon is the inside of the object. And it uses that information to be able to calculate textures when rendering. It uses that information to do dynamic simulations and to be able to 3D print something. So that's what it's used for. And we go into how to fix normals in another tutorial. I'll leave that link here too if you want to learn more about it. If you have stick UVs on, it'll actually have the UV scale as you adjust this end growth. So it just affects how your UVs are displayed on your sweep. Actually, I'll just create a material. I'll go into our material manager. I'll create a standard redshift material just for right now. I'll create a new node. I'll add in a tile node over here. And I'll just put this into our base color and apply it to our sweep. I'll turn on the IPR. You can see this texture here, and it has UVW mapping on for its projection. In the sweep settings under stick UVs, we have this on. So if I adjust the end growth, you can see that the UVs are scaling as I adjust the end growth. So that's what stick UVs does. If I were to turn off stick UVs and scale this, you can see that our UV texture is not really changing. And that's even as we adjust the end growth. So you have options on how you'd like your UV maps to work for your sweep. This is what stick UVs does. I'm going to delete this material. That was just an example. Not the most beautiful material I've ever seen in my life. So I'll turn off IPR under Redshift. Now that we have IPR off, we can go through some more of these settings. Now there's a ton of settings here. Those are the main ones that we went through. I'd actually like to show you another option on how you can create a shape using the sweep. So I'll put this project off to the side. I'll click the middle mouse button and I'll click the middle mouse button again in our front view. We're going to start a new sweep here. So I'll go ahead and go into model mode so that I can use our sweep tool. And in this instance, I'm really just going to click twice here. And I know this is a straight line, but we can turn this straight line into a candlestick using the sweep tool. So what I'll do here is I'll add in our sweep once again. This time I'm going to name it candlestick 2. I'll name this one candlestick 1. This is our star sweep, just so that we remember what we're doing. And in our candlestick 2, we're going to drop in our spline here, and I'm going to create a flower here. We're going to sweep this flower shape. If I click the middle mouse button and zoom out, you can see this flower is way too large to sweep. So I'm going to adjust the settings for our flower. And our radius is going to be 3.7. The outer radius is going to be 4. Our petals are going to be 11. It's no longer looking like a flower, as you can see here, but it has a really interesting shape to it. I'll go ahead and add this flower in here. And you can see that it's sweeping along that spline. Sometimes it helps to see what you're doing in perspective view. I'll try making this 2.7 and making this 3. That still feels like quite a bit, so I'll try 1.7 and I'll try 2. This seems better to me. And now within this, we can also create a rail spline if we'd like to have more control. But we also have these options down here in the details graphs. The great thing about these is that we can zoom in just like how we do in the graph, and we can actually adjust our scale and rotation. So this first point is where the sweep starts, and the second point is where it ends. If you hit Control, you can add additional points. I'll add in a couple points here, and I can adjust the shape. Something that you may notice is that we're adjusting the scale in here, but we aren't seeing it in here. Now this is a gotcha kind of moment. If we go over to our spline, we have adaptive on, and our splines have intermediate points along them. Adaptive, since our spline was straight, it's not going to add any points even if our angle is 5%. So this is our angle allowed along the spline before it begins creating additional points to be able to support that curvature. So actually in this instance, instead of having adaptive and having Cinema 4D try to adapt the number of points to the curvature of the spline, what we really need is something like uniform. So I'll use a uniform spline, and you can see immediately we can see the shape we created. I can increase the number of points, and as I do that, this is becoming more and more detailed. So you can choose how high res you would like this mesh to be. And now that we've done that, we can go back in here and continue adjusting the shape of this. We can try moving these down. It's actually pretty nice to have a larger base because we want this to look sturdy. I'll reduce this part here a little bit. If you right click on a point, you can adjust the point type. If I choose 0 angle length, it'll become a little bit, it'll become a linear point, as you can see here. You can get pretty creative with this and make any shape you'd like. I think I'll move these down a little bit more. And I want the scale of this part to be a little bit smaller. This is our candlestick. You can also adjust the rotation here by creating points as well. So as I move this point up, you can see this entire thing is twisting. And you can add additional points as well to decide where you'd like it to twist and where you don't want it to twist. Down here, you'll see options from and to. This is determining our first point is negative 180 degrees and our second point is 180 degrees. So if I'd like this to actually rotate even more, I could change this to 360 degrees and now it's twisting even more along that surface. I can move this out if I don't want that twist there on the bottom and I want it to start at the top of the base. And I can move this out as well if I want the twist to stop a little bit lower. This gives you a lot of control over your mesh. We have another tab here called caps, and I actually find caps very fun. So we can choose to have both a start and end cap. If I check this box here, you'll see it removes the cap on the bottom. So this is the cap, what we're removing. If we remove it on the top, you can see there's a hole there. You can also choose what kind of tessellation you would like on your cap. Now, what's great about this is we could adjust this, and sometimes you need to, if you want to make this editable and continue 3D modeling based off of it with the other mesh tools we've gone over in the past. Something else is if you end up doing dynamic simulations with this, you can adjust the geometry some to make it work better with dynamic simulation. So there's a lot of reasons why you might want to adjust the tessellation. Our first option here is triangles. This will make this cap out of triangles. Quadrangles is a catch-all phrase for both triangles and quads. It'll use both in order to create the cap here. An n-gon is a polygon with more than 4 edges. What it'll do is just make this entire shape in one polygon called an n-gon. I usually do not want n-gons. Delaunay, and I could be pronouncing this wrong, Delaunay, it's hard for me to say that, so forgive me. But if you choose that option, you can see that you get this pattern of triangles here. And this kind of tessellation I usually see in instances more for when you're getting something ready to 3D print. We don't need this here. The next option here is regular grid. I think this one is the best option for if you're doing any kind of dynamic simulations. I'll reduce this to a smaller size, and that's actually reducing the size of our grid here, of all the squares in our grid. If you'd like the grid to be made up of squares instead of triangles, you can choose quad dominant, and it'll try to mostly make that grid pattern using quads. So you have some control there. If you want to add bevels, and you know I love bevels, if you want to add bevels to your model, you can turn on bevels right over here. And you have this option for separate controls. So what's great about having separate controls is you can choose to adjust the top bevel and the bottom bevel separately. If I don't have this checked and I adjust the bevel, it's going to do the same thing on the top and the bottom. That looks kind of weird. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to choose separate controls because we want to control these separately. For the start, I'd like to make this round. So if you remember the order in which we drew the spline, we started at the bottom. So the bottom is the start of this candlestick. So what we'll need to do is adjust this here. So we have 0.05 as our bevel. And you may be thinking that it's not worthwhile beveling the bottom of the object, but it creates realistic shadows and it makes it look more realistic when you put it on a surface. It's still worth beveling even the bottom of the object. You have the size, that's the size of the bevel. Subdivisions are how many subdivisions are used to create that curvature here along the bevel. You can adjust the tension of the bevel here. If I have this go in the negative direction, it's going to create a bevel in the negative direction here. If I make it at 100%, it'll be 100% rounded. If I make this 0, it'll be a straight line. So you can choose the shape doing that. I'll leave this at 100%. You can choose to create an extrusion. This will extrude that surface down. I don't see any point in doing that, especially for a candlestick. So I'll change this back to 0 and I'll turn off extrusion. We don't need that. I'll just leave this very simple rounded bevel here for our start. Now we can go down to our end bevel and adjust that. So we'll go up here. Solid, and these settings you'll notice are very similar to the same settings for the mesh bevel tool that we've covered previously. If you're interested in learning how to use the mesh bevel tool, you can check it out in the link below. In the meantime, solid, let's increase the size and I'll give you an idea of what it is. That is way too much. I'll do 0.3. And decrease the subdivisions. There we go. So maybe 0.04. Since this, we were running into intersections, and this is still too big for this because we have all these complex angles here. And I'm having trouble zooming in here, so I'll actually use Control D. Under our display, we have view clipping. If we change this to tiny, we'll be able to zoom in more before our camera clips. If I adjust this to large, you'll see our camera is clipping here. Small. It takes a little bit longer before it begins to clip, but you can see it begins to clip. I'll choose tiny. So we're still having this error here, and that means that this size is still too big. So you run into issues with bevels if you create a size of bevel that is larger than the surface area that is available to create that bevel. So the radius is important, the size of that radius is important. In this case, you'll notice this actually isn't rounding like what it was before. And the reason why that is because solid is actually a type of bevel that works when you use subdivision surface. So just briefly, I'm going to show you what the subdivision surface is. I'm going to zoom out here. We have this cube. If we drop the cube into a subdivision surface, you can see that it subdivides all that cube. So now it's subdivided. It has a lot more segments, and it also rounds it. So it does those two things, and it's a kind of 3D modeling that you can do. I'm going to delete this. Just want to briefly go over that so you knew what was happening there. But that kind of bevel is for subdivision surface modeling. So that is our solid bevel option here. Our next option is step. Step is a fun one. I'm going to increase this a little bit. Let's try 0.2. The number of subdivisions will affect the number of steps. So you can see that now we have an additional step there as I increase this. And this is actually a really beautiful option for a candlestick. And if you make this a glass candlestick, it'll really create some beautiful refractions there with those bevels. You still have the option for extrusion with step. Spline is fun. So spline is as you'd think it would be. You can add points here and adjust the shape of this. Very similar to the mesh bevel settings. I think for right now, I'll go with step. You can do whatever you'd like for this. We have some other options here. Bevel outside. What bevel outside does is it allows you to have your original form expand when it bevels. Usually Cinema 4D doesn't allow this to happen, and it tries to keep your object the same size when you bevel it. If you don't want your object to expand, don't use bevel outside. If you're okay with it becoming larger, you can use this. And that looks a little odd, so I'm not going to use that. Avoid self intersections. I think it's good to always keep this on. It'll prevent errors of your bevels intersecting. If I turn this off, you can see these are all intersecting and this mesh is a mess. Let's just keep on avoid self-intersections. Break Phong rounding. So I have another tutorial on what Phong is. It adds shading in between your polygons to make them look smoother. It adds some shading there. If you turn that off, you won't be having that Phong rounding there. You can actually see this more if I round this. It may be hard to see. I'm going to just have it on here for now. You can see that this edge is much more visible with break Phong rounding turned on. If I turn it off, it's much smoother. So that just affects how you would like this shape to be. I'll change this back over to step. I actually find this such an elegant shape. I might just try using round. I'll turn back on our lines so that you can see them. Our last, well, our almost last tab, you also have your Phong settings here because we have a Phong tag applied to this. But our second to last tab is selections. What this will do is allow you to create polygon and edge stored selections for your model. You can use this for texturing your model. For example, if I select shell and I want to apply this texture only to this selection, I can drag and drop that selection in here. Let's see, this is called S. And it's only applying this to the shell part of this model because the name of this polygon selection is S for shell. And we created that selection by checking this box here. We can add start cap, end cap, start bevel. And you can see all of these stored selections are here. It's useful for texturing. You can also create selections of edges, which you may find useful for other circumstances. It's just good to be aware of that it is there. I'm going to delete this ugly tile material from here. And now that we've done all of this, something you might notice is that we don't actually have a hole for a candle to go into. Now, I absolutely love generators, but there's a problem you may run into is when you want to start using your mesh tools on something you created with a generator, and you can't. The way to fix this is right-click, choose Current State to Object. It'll create a copy that you can now edit. So I'll hide our original one here. Just hide it. I hit Control and clicked on these two dots. Now we have this editable version of this candlestick. Now we can create a circle in the top. And this confuses a lot of people. So if you're a little bit confused on how to create a perfect circle here in the top, I'll click the middle mouse button and go into our top view actually, because it'll be easier to select from this view. I want to make sure that I have visible only turned on and garage shading lines. This looks like a pretty even selection. So this is looking a bit better. We'll use the circle, fit circle tool again. I'll grab it there. This is actually looking okay. And now that we've done that, we need to extrude this. So I'll hit the E button and I'll hold Control and click here, and we are extruding this down. If I hold Shift, I can even extrude and snap to specific increments using the quantize. That's not too important to me. I'll just do that. And then I'll use UL in edge mode to select this loop here. And I'll use MS because I want to bevel this with our bevel tool. I'll leave a link to the bevel tool. I'll increase our subdivisions here. And this is looking decent. And again, I know this geometry on the top of this model is not the cleanest. If you'd like to clean it up, you can use the remesh tool. I'll leave a link to how to use the remesh tool as well, because I don't have time to cover all those settings here today. But this is our beautiful candlestick. I'll just add in a cylinder and see how 0.5 looks. We need to make this a little bit smaller. We can make the height, let's say 5 inches, and see how that looks. We can, you'll notice this caps tab for our primitive cylinder is very similar. We can add fillets to this. Our fillets don't need to be that big. We can make them 0.05, just a little bit. And you can add on another cylinder. We'll make this our candle, and we'll make this other cylinder here the wick. With that done, we can make this pretty small. And pretty short. I'm snapping to things I don't want to, so I'm going to turn off Enable Snap. I'll bring up the wick here. And this is our lovely candle. My main focus is going over the 3D modeling tools in each one of these episodes. It's what my 3D modeling podcast focuses on. But you can texture this any way you'd like to. This is an example of how I've textured and lit this model here. I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, I really appreciate it if you give me a like or a thumbs up. That helps support my YouTube channel and make it possible for me to create more tutorials for the future. And thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next week here on Ambient 3D Animations.